So, good morning everyone. Welcome to the lecture 30 and the last lecture of grid and cloud computing. So, in this lecture, we'll cover the last part of our grid computing system and resource management, that is grid application trends and security measures. In grid application trends, as you have seen from the last class, we are predicting the workload based upon the past workload in a grid system. And in the second part, we are going to see some of the security measures that is related to grid computing infrastructure, how the resources are requested, how the resources are securely provided from a particular site, and what are the security requirements in the grid environment that we are going to see in the second part. In the first one, I will tell you about two methods. These two are nothing but the research work based upon the research work of some researcher, right? These methods are developed. The first method is called as your auto regression method. In auto regression method, before going to that method, let me tell you, regression is nothing but finding a line. Generally in regression, what we are doing, we are finding a line. Suppose I am drawing a particular line such that all the points, suppose in a particular plane, you have a set of points, right? So you have to draw a line which closely fit all the dots, right? Or all the values. If you can draw such a line which closely fit the points, that is called as our regression method, right? And how we are going to draw that line, whether the line is a means if it is a linear one or non-linear one, that is different thing. But you are given with a set of points and you have to draw one line which closely fit each and every line, right? Or you can say each and every point is very close to or lies in the above of the line or on the line, right? So here what we are using, this auto regression method is used to do the prediction. You have to predict something. What is the prediction? You have seen in the quantitative aptitude also. Suppose I will tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then what is the next number? Then you will say that the next number is 6. Similarly, if I will tell you 1, 3, 5, 7, what is the next number? You will say 9. Right? How you are saying this is 6 or this is 9? That is based on the past data. You have observed the past data and found that the difference of these data are 1. So you are expecting the next data is 6. Sometimes it may not be 6. Suppose the next value is 8. So you fail. But based upon the past data, you are doing the prediction. So here what happened in AR regression or auto regression, which we call as AR method, applies to a time sequence of load samples. Like here you have seen a sequence of number. Similarly, we are taking a time sequence of load samples, and load samples is represented by x3. Then the coefficient used in the AR method are estimated for the past load sequence. We are taking a particular coefficient, okay, to estimate the past load of the data sequence. So we are seeing that the difference between each and every number is 1. In the second case, the difference between each number is 2. So based on this past load data sequence, we are going to predict the future load sequence. So this prediction method uses xt is equal to summation over I is equal to 1 to p, where p is your traceback span, how much data you are available, right? For example, you are available with the last 5 years data, last 10 years data. Phi I is a coefficient which is decided based upon the past workload. Then xt minus 1, the previous value. Like in this case, 6 previous value is 5. Or in this case, 9's previous value is 7. Plus some epsilon t, that is nothing but time t. Based upon this, what you have to do, you have to make the prediction. Okay. So this epsilon t is just nothing but the noise or some error, or you can say some variations. For that we have added this epsilon t. So AR method uses this particular formula to uh, do the predictions. So three things is required. One is your coefficient, another is your previous one. In order to predict t, you have to go for xt minus 1, and third one is your noise value. With these three terms, you are going to do the prediction. Now, if you go for this ARP model, because you have seen that there is a summation here, right? Summation is nothing but our for loop. If you want to implement it, that I starts from 1 to p, and p is your traceback span, right? So this ARP model predicts the load index, that is xt plus 1. If you want to predict xt plus 1, like I told you, in a sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the next value is 6. So if you want to go for this value, the last value 6, that is xt plus 1 at time t, which is based upon the past p load. Past p load means 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is represented as xt minus 1. Like that, you have to go for xt minus p plus 1. That's why it is called as p as the time span. And with respect to each and every xt value, you have a coefficient. The coefficients are phi1, phi2 up to phi p. Okay. And if you have a larger value of p, if you have more data, larger value of p means you have more data. If more data is there, definitely your prediction is better. Prediction will improve. Suppose you have 5 years data, somebody has 10 years data. Definitely 10 years prediction is more better than your 5 year prediction. Although it is depends upon the technique, but based upon the collection of the data, prediction will be more accurate. Okay. So this AR method needs to find accurate coefficient. If you do the accurate coefficient phi I, which is based upon your the past data, then the current load index can easily be predicted. And this method assumes that xt minus I is linear and stationary. Is these values what you are doing, t minus I, where I may be 1 to your p plus 1, right? So this I may be your 1 to p plus 1. This is linear and stationary. And if you find their mean value, the load series mean value, you will get a zero mean value. If you sum all the values and see, then all the values are having zero mean, right? The next method is a hybrid method, which is called as H method. It is taking n-step looked workload prediction method. Means if you are present at this position, it is going to tell you the next n steps. Suppose today I want to predict the temperature. Okay, from today's temperature, tomorrow's temperature, day after tomorrow's temperature, day after day tomorrow's temperature, right? Suppose today's date is 15, then you are predicting for 16, 17 and 18. That is nothing but if n step look ahead is your 3, then you can predict for the next 3 days. Okay. So for this, what it is doing, H model is taking two linear arrays. One is AL of I, another is AU of I. AL of I is nothing but the lower bound, AU is nothing but the upper bound of the confidence in the values. So we are putting two boundary, lower bound and upper bound. Okay. The confidence range is specified by a pair of point values, that is XLT to XQT. Here you are taking the upper bound and the lower bound of confidence interval value. Okay, but confidence range is between these 2 points. So they are using a specific filter here, which is not clearly defined how this processing is done. But for that namesake, I am telling you this particular folder, that is Savitsky and Gole filter. Okay, this filter is used to smooth the confidence window. For example, for an image processing application, an image is not smooth. Okay. So what you have to do, for example, there is a curve like this. So if you want to smooth that curve, the curve will come like this, right? So for that, they are using this SG filter, right? The evaluation checks different trace times when P parameter. So we are looking into the past history, that is P. Okay, last model we have seen. So by looking into that P, that is nothing but ARP computation that is based upon the past data. So the evaluation checks the past data. Based upon that, it is doing the next look ahead, n-step look ahead in the H model. So here we are using two things. One is two parameters. One is P and another is W, right? These two parameters have a major impact on the prediction accuracy. Prediction accuracy means you told that tomorrow there is a rain, but there is a rain. Then the accuracy is 100%. You say tomorrow the temperature is, let's say, 20 degree, but let's say tomorrow's temperature is 18 degree. Then your difference is only 2 degree. So error is 2 degree. Your accuracy is not 100%, right? And if you choose a optimal value of the window size, okay, then definitely your prediction will be better. If you choose a particular value with respect to the workload, then definitely you can say that with this optimal window size, you are doing better prediction. Okay, so this trace span P has less impact on the prediction error. Sometimes if the P value is very huge, if very huge, then the prediction error is low. If the trace span P value is smaller, then the prediction error is more. But more or less, it has less impact. And fixed parameter values in the H model may not predict accurately. If you put some dynamic parameters instead of the fixed parameter, the prediction may be more accurate, right? So here the confidence window, they are taking that confidence window is nothing but C of T plus N. T is your current time, N is your further look ahead. Like I told you, we are present in this position and you are predicting for the next 3 days. So it is characterized by your X plus L by 2, where L is defined as your upper bound, as well as lower bound load index. XT is your load index that you are going to do, right? That is the length of the confidence window predicted at time T plus N. So you have to check the lower bound as well as upper bound of the load index. Based upon that, you have to calculate. And this default value of epsilon is generally 5% is applied. That is noise. Whenever you are designing a particular model, the model may have some noise that is taken as 5%. And smaller the confidence window, the higher the chance of adding task scheduling and load balancing in a production grid environment. If confidence window size is low, then task scheduling and load balancing is required in the grid environment. So if you see, this is the algorithm. What is the input to this algorithm? The input to this algorithm is nothing but your ARP, right? That is AR model with parameter P, your workload index XT or load index XT. You have to predict for next n days. So look at span is N and historical event W. Okay. So based upon that, you have to follow this particular process. Whatever we discussed, that is written in this particular algorithm, right? Here you can see first page is nothing but produce the refined workload, that is XT. Next is generate the smoothened workload of index for which they are using SG filter. Then we are going to predict the workload for a period of T plus 1 to T plus N, XT plus 1 to XT plus N. That's why the look ahead is N. You know the XT, the current load. Based upon that, you are predicting XT plus 1 to XT plus N. Next one, you have to iterate, right? You have to smooth the load index, that is based upon the X of the load of T minus W plus 1 to XT, right? Similarly, you have to compute the confidence window between these two, okay? And this process will continue, okay? So this is the algorithm followed by hybrid model for workload prediction with confidence interval. Now come to another model, that is AH model, that is called as adaptive prediction scheme. So adaptive prediction scheme is an extension of our H model, whatever we have seen, that is hybrid model. Okay. So it is implemented using the historical interval, that is W, which is dynamically trained and validated from the past workload value. So if you replace the fixed parameter by dynamic parameter, definitely your performance will improve. So two adaptations are integrated to capture the workload changes dynamically. Here they have adapted two adaptations. First adaptation is nothing but you have to properly choose the historical interval W. If you choose historical interval W, then you can reduce the prediction error. That's why I told you in the machine learning also, if the data size is very huge, definitely what will happen? Definitely your error rate is less. Right? That's why proper choice of historical interval W is very much important to reduce the error. Okay. Next is what is our purpose here? The purpose is to reduce the error. If whatever you are predicting for this particular subject, you are expecting, let's say 90 out of 100. Okay. If you secure 90 out of 100 after the end of examination, then your expectation is 90 and your mark is also 90. That means error is 0. But your expectation is 90, you are getting 80. So there is an error of 10, 90 minus 80, modulus is 10, right? So our objective is to minimize the prediction error. That error is we are calculating, that is called as mean square error. So we have to minimize it. Similarly, what people did, they have compared these model, that is AH model and AH model, whatever we have seen here, that is adaptive prediction scheme, and AR model in terms of two things. One is your, you can see aware grid, another is your grid 5000. In both system, they have compared the AR model and AH model to check that which model is performing better. Okay. So in the AH model, they have considered two things. One is window based prediction. They have specified a window size. Based upon that, they are doing prediction. In computer network also, if you remember sliding window protocol, in that also we are specifying a window size. Another variant of AH model, that is adaptive prediction scheme, that is median window based prediction. They have used median window for prediction. So if you see this algorithm, which they have compared using two workload, that is by aware grid and there is grid 5000 by France. So you can see the mean square error is more in the case of AR model, right? But the error is less in the case of window based prediction model. Okay, you can see the second bar is minimum in each and every case, which indicates that window based prediction model is better, then median window based prediction model is better, then the AR model is better, right? And if you want to know the figure, you can see also here the error is only around 0.12, you can say up to 0 point something in the case of AR model prediction. Sorry, in the case of window based prediction model. But if you see in the first bar, it is more than 1, right? Around 5, right? In the case of AR model. So here they are specifying the AR method leads to the MAC in the range of 2% to 30%. See, 30% error, that is more, right? But if you go for window based AH model, the error is the lowest, that is 0.1% to 0.7%, which is acceptable, right? So this is the comparison you can see. Now let us take a poll before continuing next. So in comparison to AH model and AR model, which one is the best model? AR model is better or AH model is better? Just now we discussed. Which is having mean square error, less error, that you have to answer. You have last 20 seconds. Okay. What is the correct answer? The correct answer is your AH model, not AR model. Just I told you in the previous slide. Okay. You can see in this case, AH model is having minimum error, not AR model. Right? AR model is having maximum error. That's why that model is not good. Now let us discuss about the trust models for grid security enforcement. So many potential security issues may occur in a grid environment because many organizations, many sites are providing computational resources. So any time you may have security problem, right? Security issue is very much important. If a centralized system, then it is easy, but in a distributed system, it is difficult, right? So what are the issues may happen? Network sniffer or network analyzer can analyze the pattern. Okay, based upon that, they can inject something which will be damaging your computational resources, or which may be killing the cycles of the computational resources. Out of control access. You have you as a user, you are authorized to use the resources, but what happened? Another person is using that resources, right, on behalf of you. Faulty operations may happen, malicious operations may happen, integration of local security mechanisms is a issue, delegation, because each and every organization is having their security issues, right? So what happened? You want to integrate the local security issues with the grid security issues. Local security mechanism with the grid security mechanism. In that also issue, compatibility issues will come, or interoperability issues will come. Delegation is a issue, dynamic resources and services, and attack provenance is a issue, right? Anybody can do man in the middle attack in the grid resources, right? Now, see here how this security enforcement is done. So when a user job demands the resource site to provide security assurance by issuing a security demand. So user generally initiates this request of security demand to the resource site that we represent by SD. So once this job is reached to the resource site, what the site will do? The site needs to reveal the trustworthiness. Okay, that is nothing but your trust index, that is TI. So user is requesting to the resource site, user is sending the job to the resource site or demanding the resource site. Okay, that is represented by security demand. By specifying the security demand, user is submitting the job. Resource site is providing the trust index. So if you see, in order to maintain or satisfy the security assurance condition, TI should be greater than SD. Suppose you are asking the requirement is 0.7 and your site is 0.8, then this condition will satisfy. Otherwise, your job demand or your security demand will not be fulfilled by that particular site. So what are the challenges? First challenge is integration of the existing system and technologies. Whatever system exists and grid technologies, if you want to integrate, you may face problem. Okay. Second one is interoperability of hosting environment. Interoperability says that, for example, you are launching something in Windows environment, you want to switch to Linux environment. So it should be interoperable. It should run irrespective of the environment. Otherwise, there is an interoperability issue. Next is to construct the trust relationship among interacting hosting environment. So if the trust relationship is more, then number of jobs submitted to a particular site will increase, right? That is the challenges with respect to the trust. Now, if you see, the resource sharing among entities is one of the major goals of the grid computing, because anybody can share the resources that you have seen in BOINC. You can join your computer system to BOINC, and any point of time you can leave from BOINC as well. So in order to create the proper trust relationship between the grid entities, grid user is there, grid provider is there, grid broker is there, grid security infrastructure is there. So we are using two kind of trust model. One is we are taking our cryptography and network security concept, that is public key infrastructure based. Okay, this PKI is used to authenticate and authorize the entities. Anyone using the resources or anyone is providing the resources, they need to provide a username and password and go through a process of authentication. Okay, or we have to authorize he is a legitimate user. Okay, the next one is called as your reputation based model. Reputation means reputation will definitely increase if you are providing the better services. Okay, reputation will come from the society. Society will say that this particular service provider is reputed. Now come to a generalized trust model. If you see a generalized trust model, this is an example of generalized trust model. I told you security demand is done by the user. Trustworthiness, that is trust index, is provided by the resource side. So based upon that, if you see, three things are there. One is defense capacity. Okay, another is recommendation trust, another is called direct reputation. Three things are there, and this inference module is required to aggregate these factors, right? So here you can use various methods, like people are using intrusion detection method to detect the intrusion and combat with that intrusion, right? Similarly, people are using antivirus. In our computer system also we are using antivirus, so that anyone is injecting any virus or worms into our system, then it can be easily identified. Firewall is providing a boundary, so outside people or outside anything you are doing, you have to go through the firewall so that any attacks can be avoided. So that is coming under our defense capacity. But if you go for the reputation based upon if a resource, if a job is submitted to a particular grid site, what is the success rate? For example, you are submitting your work to, let's say, a grid. Then you are asking your friends that what is the success rate? We have already used the grid computing infrastructure. So he's saying the success rate is good. Then you will put in that resource site. What is the turnaround time? What is the completion time? Or what is the slowdown ratio? What is the site utilization? Based upon that, you can build the reputation. So direct reputation points to this one, right? So if you are, suppose you are, there are so many shopping malls are there. So you want to go to a particular shopping mall. So before that, you ask your friend, what about that shopping mall? He's saying, okay, his replacement of product is good, his reputation is good. Okay, so based upon that, you are heading towards that particular shopping mall. But whenever you are talking about this recommendation trust, which is called as also the secondary trust, it is obtained indirectly. I am taking a recommendation from you to visit to a particular shopping mall, right? If your recommendation says that no, that shopping mall is not good, then I am not going to visit it. So we are depending on the other's view, that is indirect. But direct reputation is you have to do with some statistics. What is the success rate? Suppose you are purchasing a particular product, somebody will say it will last for minimum 5 to 6 years if you purchase from this vendor, right? So based upon that, you can build the direct reputation. Now, let us see in the details about the reputation-based trust model. In reputation trust model, what we are doing, jobs are sent to resource site by specifying the demand, that is security demand, right? And site is trustworthy to meet the user demand by specifying the trustworthiness, that is TI, right? Then the site's trustworthiness is usually calculated using three things, that is our defense capacity, direct reputation, and recommendation trust. Based upon these three factors, we will aggregate and say that yes, it is satisfying the things, right? If you see the defense capacity, it refers to the site's ability to protect itself from the danger. If you can protect the resources from the intruder or the hacker, Okay, then you can say your defense capacity mechanism is better, for which we are using intrusion detection, firewall, or response capabilities, or antivirus system. Next is, if you go for direct reputation is based upon the prior experience. Prior experience means success rate, site utilization, turnaround time, how much time the site is down. Each and every factor you have to analyze. So in order to say that, yes, that particular site is having reputation. So there are two types of experience here. One is positive experience, another is negative experience. So positive experience with a particular site will improve reputation. If somebody, like in a product also, if you purchase from Amazon and Flipkart, if rating is increased from 4.5 to 5.5, definitely your 4.5 to, let's say, 4.8, okay, out of 5, let us take out of 5, 4.5 to 4.8, definitely the reputation is increasing. But if a negative experience happen, which will decrease your reputation, 4.5 to you come to 4, so people will say that no, this product is not that much good. Similarly, there is a fuzzy trust model. What we are doing in fuzzy trust model, fuzzy means the values is not 0 or not 1, it is in between 0 and 1, right? So here also we are specifying the security demand of the job, and trustworthiness of the site is dependent on TI. But here we are taking a two-level fuzzy logic. What is two-level fuzzy logic? In the first level, you have to estimate the aggregation of numerous trust parameters. What are the trust parameters? We have seen here three trust parameters. One is defense capacity, recommended trust, and direct reputation. Right? Second one is, once you aggregate this parameter, security attribute into scalar quantities required for job scheduling and resource mapping. Okay, you have to do the security attribute in terms of scalar quantities. Like fuzzy logic means, suppose I will say that a person is tall, if height is more than 6 foot, then the person with 5 foot 9 inch, whether he is tall or not, so somebody will say that he is 0.9 times tall, 0.90% tall. So similar kind of scalar quantities you have to take into consideration. So here, if you see, the TI is normalized as a single real number with 0, representing the condition with highest risk, okay, in a particular site, or 1 representing the condition, right, that the site is risk free. So you have to give a real number in between 0 to 1. That's why it is called as a fuzzy trust. We are not saying it is having risk or it is completely free from risk. We are giving a value in between 0 to 1 to specify it. So fuzzy model consists of 4 phases. One is fuzzification. You have to specify this thing. Next, you have to infer it, aggregate the parameters, then you defuzify it. So if a site's trust index cannot match the job security, whatever you are demanding, your SD is greater than TI, then it is not satisfied. It should be TI is greater than equal to SD. So the trust model could deduce detailed security feature to guide the site security and upgrade as a result of tuning the fuzzy system. Then it will monitor the fuzzy system. So always the security demand is below your trustworthiness index. Then only your job will be assigned to that particular site. So here we are using some major authentication methods. Okay, one is using the password. You can protect a hacker or a intruder to use the system, right? But password is a common thing. Okay, password shows the password is most vulnerable, because if one person knows other person's password, he can easily do it. Although password is a security mechanism, but it is weak. Next one is PKI, that is public key infrastructure, right? In PKI, what we are doing, we are introducing a trusted third party. Like you know that whenever you are doing a banking transaction or you are booking a ticket in IRCTC, so you are one party, IRCTC is another party, in between you are doing the payment. So bank is the third party. Okay. So similarly, here we are introducing a third party, which is nothing but certification authority. This certification authority is mapping your private key, public key with your private key. So they are maintaining the unique pairs of private and public key. Generally, public key is open to all, right? And public key is issued by the certification authority, okay, for recognizing a legitimate user. Like you can see in our Gmail also, our username, you can say it is a public key and password is our private key. So there is a mapping between the public key and private key, right? And this private key is exclusive for each and every user. Your private key is different from my private key, and it is not known to others. If anybody know this private key, then he may get the SS. So here we are using a digital certificate in IEEE X.509 format, which consists of the username, user public key, certification authority name, and secret signature, by which you can specify, you can provide a secure infrastructure to both user and the provider, right? Now, let us see the authorization part. Suppose authorization for SS control. Somebody want to assess it, how you are going to provide the authorization. So authorization is a process to exercise SS control of the shared resources. So on behalf of me, let's say broker is acting on behalf of a user. So you are giving access to your broker. So your username, password you have to provide to your broker so that a broker can book the resources for you, right? So the decision can be done in a particular point, that is in a centralized place. Okay, that is the access point of the services, or in a centralized place you can take the decision, can be made at any place, right? Maybe in a centralized place, or it may be access point of the services. So what the certification authority is doing? The certification authority is a special entity which is capable of issuing the certificate or revoking the certificate. If somebody is not authorized, he has issued the certificates, and later point of time he can revoke the certificate also. So certification authority is responsible for providing various security mechanisms, right? Like public key, private key, so that security requirements can be satisfied. So the authority can be classified into three categories. One is your attribute authorities, another is policy authorities, another is identity authorities. Where attribute authorities is based upon attribute assertions. Like your data is having several attributes. So based upon a particular attribute, the hypertext is designed, or the security is enforced based upon the particular attribute. And later point of time, if you claim for that attribute, then only you can access your data. That is done by the attribute authorities. Policy authorities issues authorization policies. Who is authorized to use that particular grid site? Next one is identity authorities issues certificates. They are providing the certificates so that anybody can see certificate. Like in our examination, once you graduate from your institute, you will get a certificate. That certificate is having unique features. Based upon that, one person will say this certificate is genuine. So here the authorization server makes this final authorization decision, whether the certificate is original or not. Everything is done by authorization server. So let us see these three things so that the idea is more clear. So there are three models we are using here. One is first one is called as your push model, subject push model, right? Second one is called as your resource pooling model. Third one is called as your authorization agent model. So here you can see the subject. You can see here it is written as subject. The subject is nothing but the user, right? You can see there is in the various positions the user are there. With respect to the different model, the user is present in various places. And resource indicate your grid side. So what happened in the subject push model? In the subject push model, the user conduct the handshake with your authority first. User is initiating the request to your authorization authority. Once he made the request, okay, to the authority, the resource site in a sequence. The authority will give approval, then the user is going to use the resources. First the user will request to authorization authority. Authorization authority will give permission. Then the user is going to use the resource and get the result from the resource. Such type of model is called as your subject push model. In the second case, what happened? The user is directly requesting to the resource. That is called as a resource pooling model. The user takes the resource first. Then resource is taking permission from the authorization authority. That is, the resource contacts its authority to verify the request, whether that request he need to accept or reject. Once he get approval, then the service is provided to the user. That is called a resource pooling model. Third case, the user requests the authorization authority, like the previous case, first case, right? First case, we are also requesting, the user is requesting the authorization authority. Then the authorization authority will check the availability of the resources, right? If the resource is available, then the authorization authority is going to provide that resource to the user, which is called your authorization agent, right? So these three authorization models you can use in grid system. The last part of today's discussion is grid security infrastructure. And you know that GSI is an essential component in grid infrastructure. So this grid, the grid requires a security infrastructure with the following properties. First is easy to use. It also provides you virtual organizations. So in this case, it is a virtual organization security. Okay, while working well with the site policies of each resource provide site. It also provides the authentication and encryption of all interactions. These are the properties that is provided by your grid security infrastructure. GSI also provides fundamental security services just like message protection, authentication, delegation, confidentiality, integrity, access control. These are the features also provided by GSI. GSI enables secure authentication and communication over an open network. So you know that many sites are interfacing to provide the resources, to get the resources. Many users are connected to the grid system. So it is an open network, right? So how to provide secure authentication and communication, that is the responsibility of GSI. And GSI also provides you single sign-on facility so that one person should not face multiple times login in the same site. Suppose you are visiting one site, you are changing one tab to another tab, it is again asking username and password. Then it is a difficult one, right? So single sign-on facility is also supported by GSI. Next is GSI supports two levels of security. One is message levels of security. Message level security supports our WS security, that is web services security standard, or web service secure conversation specification to protect the message through your SOAP protocol. Okay, simple object access protocol messages or protocol we are using. Transport level security, what we are doing here, the authentication is done by TLS with the support of our X.509 certificate. So these two level security is provided by GSI. So GSI is maybe thought of as being composed of four distinct functions: message authentication, message protection, authentication, delegation, and authorizations. So whatever we discussed, that is trans-level security, is provided, supports your WS security or WS secure conversation. Okay, that is whatever we discussed in the service-oriented architecture. And in the transport level security, you are dealing with your X.509 certificate. Right? So here you can see GSI functional layer at the message and transport level. So you can see here the transport level is there. Here the message level is there. Okay, they are providing authorization, delegation, authentication, message protection, and message format. But irrespective of the message level or transport level, all are using your SOAP message, simple object access protocol message, to communicate between two different entities, right? Now, let us see detailed about the transport level authority security. So transport level security entails your SOAP message conveyed over a network connection protected by your TLS. Okay, TLS is providing such security to you, right? Next is it provides both integrity protection and privacy. Integrity means somebody should not change your data in any interactions. One third person should not change your data. Okay, so integrity should not be violated. And transport level security is used in conjunction with your X.509 for providing the certificate or providing the authentication, right? The next one is authentication may be done by username or password in a SOAP message. That is your transport level security. But in the message level security, you are using SOAP message in order to communicate between two different entities. So WS security standards and WS secure conversation standard is providing you the message level security. Apart from that, GSI allows 3 additional protection mechanisms. That is integrity protection. Integrity says that a receiver can verify that messages were not altered in the transit from the sender. While you are communicating a message from the sender, in between the message is not modified. Integrity is providing you that assurance. And later point of time, the receiver should not say that I have not received the message. That is called as reputation, non-reputation. One should not deny that I have not received the message. The next one is your encryption. Encryption means you are changing your plain text to the ciphertext so that nobody can modify, nobody can understand the ciphertext. Only receiver is going to change from ciphertext to the plain text. Third one is your replay prevention. So here a receiver can verify that it has not received the same message previously. So it may happen that due to network delay or due to transmission problem, one message is delivered twice. So that also taken care by the GSI. So in the authentication and delegation, GSI has supported authentication and delegation through your X.509 certificate and public key. So by the help of your public key infrastructure, it is providing this, right? And how GSI is authenticating? First one, a certificate includes 4 primary pieces of information. One is your subject name, another is the public key, next is your identity of the certification authority and digital signature. So these are the 4 features which is used for the GSI authentications, right? So by looking into the digital signature of the certification authority or identity of the certification authority, you will know that whether that particular authentication or the request should accept or the request need to be rejected. GSI also supports your delegation and sign-on that I already told you. If you are moving from one side to another side, then you need not log in to the system repeatedly. So there is a single login. Only one login is sufficient to do that. Okay, so you can see the trust delegation. There is another feature. In trust delegation, what we are doing, number of times we are passing through various pages in the grid, right, in order to get the resources. So we have to ensure that there is a single sign-on. GSI provides the delegation capability and delegation service. So a proxy certificate consists of a new certificate and a private key. So here they are issuing the proxy certificate in which the private key is there, right? So that you can authenticate whether it is belongs to the delegation is delegation services, you can verify. The new certificate contains your owner's identity and modified slightly to indicate that it is a proxy certificate. One can identify whether it is a proxy certificate or it is a normal certificate, right? And the new certificate is signed by the owner rather than the certification authority. Certification authority is not doing the signature in the new certificate. Only proxy certificates, the certification authority is going to sign. The rest is done by the owner. So you can see how the trust delegation happens in this diagram. You can see there is a certification authority, especially in the PKI or Kerberos, we are using certification authority, which is providing you the public and private key, right? A pair of public and private key. So certification authority is going to sign in the certificate, right, by putting his signature, which is given to the user. Okay. Next is user is signing and creating the proxy certificate. That's why it is written the new certificate is generated by the owner itself. Similarly, from one proxy certificate, you can generate another proxy certificate, and this process will continue. That's why it is called a sequence of trust delegation, in which the new certificates are signed by owner, not by the certification authority. Further certificates are done by the user only, not to the certification